Welcome to another episode of Box Out Banter. No, that is not Chris Okamura introducing this pod like he normally does. It is I, Jordan Christmas, but Chris is here too. Chris, how are you doing?
Not bad, not bad.
The NBA season, we were talking about it a little before we started recording, but the season
Training camp's hit tomorrow.
here. It's training, yeah, like media day happened today. For some teams are going to do it tomorrow. Then training camp this week. The NBA released their preseason schedule, preseason will start on December 11th. It's a quick turnaround. And I'll admit it, I've had some trouble keeping up with it. It's unprecedented times, not really used to the speed. It seems like everything happened in 5 days, but you miss some free agency signings here and there. And as you're doing notes and preparing and researching to preview the season, you're just like, oh, that happened. Oh, this happened. But all of that out of the way, we are going to do a new thing for the next 2 episodes. We're going to preview the NBA season. I came up with this idea, brought it to Chris. He was totally on board. So if anybody ever follows any esports of any kind, or me personally, I like to watch fighting games. There's a thing called a tier list, and usually tier list, they rank the characters, which one's the best, mechanically, which one had flaws and all that, and they rank them accordingly. So I figured, instead of doing the old boring, let's preview every team and every playoff team in the West, I wanted to do a tier ranking. And part of this is also because I'm still working on doing a tier list video of the best players in the NBA, where I rank the NBA players via tier rather than ranking them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 by number. So this is a little test run to see how this works and see if I could tweak with the project a little bit. But I think this is a more unique take on rankings, Chris.
It should be a lot more fun. I think I've done this in the past, and it just gives you a more because a lot of the times there's groupings of teams, there's pretty big spaces between them, and so just ranking them by number doesn't really give you an accurate assessment of what you feel about these teams.
Right. Some teams can still be a contender, but you don't consider them the favorite, or there's a team with high upside.
So, spoilers, the second best team in the West, the gap between the Lakers and the second best team right now is pretty large.
Yeah.
I mean,
and we're so I guess with that intro, we should just get into it.
Yeah.
So tier 1, aka tier A, if again doing the esports corollary, or team S, excuse me.
Tier S,
the S category is usually the highest. Tier 1 S category, aka I named it the team with LeBron. And last I checked,
so it's your championship favorite. It's the
Los Angeles Lakers,
your go-to favorite team.
They should be the go-to favorites, to be honest. I don't think
that's a question.
No, it's not. They got better in the offseason. They bolstered their bench. They got an upgrade at point guard. We talked about it a little bit last week, but the Lakers somehow got better, and they still have LeBron and Anthony Davis, who are 2 of the top 5 tier 1 franchise players in the NBA.
Yeah, and I don't think, and the thing is, not only are they 2 top 5 players in the NBA, but they are the perfect complements to each other in almost every way. And so it's such a unique situation for them to be in. But now they have, I feel like last year, Pelinka and the Lakers were kind of hamstrung because they were stuck waiting for Kawhi for so long that they kind of were picking from the scrap pile at the end. Obviously, they got some good players still, and they won a championship, so you can't really say picking from the scrap pile. But I mean, there were a lot of they didn't really have time to. They were on plan B and C at a certain point. You can tell this year, especially after, obviously, any team that wins a championship, you're going to have players that want to come for a discount, that want to ring, that want to win,
play with LeBron,
and AD. You have that already now that's established as a thing that works. You have obviously having the championship is going to have more of an impact of okay, cool, yeah, come play for a discount, like a Montrezl Harrell thing. I don't think he would have come if we hadn't won the championship,
right?
Or at least for that price tag. But I mean, the thing is that they got better in almost every way you can conceivably think of, and I think that even the concerns that you would have, like my biggest concern was with Montrezl Harrell, but I think like and his defense and like what we talked about last week was it's not really that big of a concern because his defensive issues last year came when he was guarding larger bigs and fives, where the
and
Lakers
he was also kind of left out to dry in the scheme.
right, because he was the only five that the Clippers would consistently play. So they would have him out there, and Zubac can't cover for him. And then if Zubac's not on the floor, Montrezl Harrell is the biggest guy, and he's playing the five. Mm-hmm. And so now when you have the Lakers, he's going to be playing alongside Anthony Davis or Marc Gasol, who are unbelievable defensive players. Or if he does play the five, he's going to have a highly switchable wing or four with him. So like a Markieff Morris or like a Kyle Kuzma, right?
But he also has because with the Clippers, he had his tag team dance partner in Lou Williams for pick and roll, but now he has Dennis Schroeder. And I wanted to ask you actually real quickly, because there was a quote today about Dennis Schroeder. Dennis Schroeder basically said, "I'm done with the bench stuff. It was cool in OKC, but I'm ready to start now," which, he's 27. He hasn't really gotten consistent starting jobs at this point. So I'd say I get where he's coming from his perspective, but I wanted to actually kind of ask you, what do you think about Schroeder in a starting lineup? Because, at first glance, you hear it and you're like, oh my God, really? Like the Lakers starting lineup seems pretty set, but I'm looking at the roster. I was looking at it heading into this, and it's possible he could start. I mean, I think he'll be in closing lineups a lot for the Lakers, but what do you think about him as a starter? Because he could take KCP's job. I think
he'd take Wes Matthews' job before he takes KCP's job.
I think Wes Matthews was better than KCP last year. That's why I say KCP would go first. But I mean, honestly.
I think just depending on how much they're getting paid and like the veteran sort of savvy with KCP being in that starting lineup all last year, I don't think he loses that job. I think
fair.
It's more of a Matthews coming off the bench. Mm-hmm. But I think, again, like you said, I don't think the starters really matter. I think it comes down to closing lineups and playing time, and I don't think that's going to be an issue. Apparently, Schroeder, there's sources saying the Lakers haven't locked down any starting lineup, but that Rob, AD, and LeBron have all been in conversation with Schroeder this entire time. So I'm assuming that he wouldn't say that unless there's some kind of indication that that's going to happen.
Mm. Yeah.
Or, unless he's just talking out of his ass, which, highly could, whatever. But I mean, the thing is that I don't think he would make a statement like that without, if he is in conversation with LeBron and AD and Pelinka, I don't think that would just come out of nowhere.
Right.
So I think it is under consideration. My concern and my big thing is, the reason I loved Rondo coming off the bench is because it gave them a chance to. It gave like a head of the snake, so to speak.
It gave a structure to the second unit,
right? Where now, as much as I love Alex Caruso, I don't think he is the guy that's going to be able to head that snake in the bench.
He's not a pure point guard in the sense of what to do, how to set up the offense, and you set the table up. I agree.
So, that's my big concern. And so to me, you'd want to stagger LeBron and Schroeder's minutes at least earlier in the game, and then as it flows, you see how it goes. But I think as a set thing, I think Schroeder off the bench is smarter in the same way that we used Rondo, where Rondo played starter minutes, but he was a bench guy.
I agree. And like Schroeder coming off the bench last year, he averaged almost 19 points a game, and his true shooting percentage was 57.5, which was just above league average. But a guard coming off the bench giving you league average efficiency at 19 points per game, not to mention 4 assists, and he was part of that deadly crunch time lineup OKC had. I mean, starter's just a nominal thing at this point because there's just so much lineup versatility in today's NBA that people go in and out. The closing lineup is what really matters. But as far as the Lakers go, I mean, I just posed that question because it just illustrates how much I think more than anything, the Lakers obviously got better upgrades, but I think where the Lakers really upgraded was their lineup versatility. And look, they're already going to have versatile lineups when you have LeBron and Anthony Davis. But getting Marc Gasol so you can have a more cleaner fit with a too big lineup with if you wanted to do Gasol and AD or LeBron and Marc Gasol, or do a lineup of Dennis Schroeder, Wes Matthews, KCP, Marc Gasol, and throw in whoever else you want at the 4, Kuzma, your boy, or Markieff Morris. The Lakers can also run normal lineups without having LeBron and AD on the court. So if Frank Vogel was like, we're going to have stretches with LeBron and Anthony Davis both out of the game at the same time, which did happen sometimes last year, the Lakers could be able to stay afloat more.
Right. And again, I think you bring up a great point of lineup versatility. I don't see any holes in their team. And like, this is coming from a Lakers fan, so like take it a grain of salt. But like, I don't see any kind of holes where there is a player or a team or a style that's going to give them trouble.
Yeah.
Where I
can
think
play many styles.
Where I think like, oh, okay, if they run into this, that's a problem. Where they have enough versatility and enough bodies where I'm not scared of anyone, which is terrifying to think about.
Mm-hmm. And and that is why the Lakers are the clear favorite to me to win the title. I know we'll talk about the East next week, but I'd even put them in the Bucks. I'd put a chasm between them and the Bucks as well. But
yeah, I think there's a clear difference.
Yeah. So jumping from a Grand Canyon size, from one side of a Grand Canyon size gap to the other side is tier 2, tier A, the contenders. And at this point, I think maybe our list will probably start to differ, but I'm going to give you my 2 contenders, or I'm going to give you my 2 teams that I put in this category. If you have anything different, we could talk about the difference. We can't do all 15 teams because it'd be a 15-hour podcast, which I'd be down for, but I don't think the listeners would. But I have the Clippers and the Nuggets. I put the Clippers actually ahead of the Nuggets in this, and I know the Nuggets came back last year and beat the Clippers 3-1, or came back from a 3-1 deficit and beat the Clippers 4-3 in the second round of the playoffs. And I know everybody on Twitter got their jokes off. I know Laker fans were just sitting back, sipping cognac, acting like Shannon Sharp with a Black and Mild in their mouth, just like, see, what about them Clippers? But regardless, I still think the Clippers are the second best team in the West. I think Ibaka was a clear upgrade over Montrezl Harrell. If you're talking about lineup versatility, I think getting Serge Ibaka actually upgrades the Clippers lineup versatility, because you could play him and Zubac together. You can obviously have Ibaka at the 5 without getting bullied by guys like Anthony Davis and Jokic. You're not going to stop those guys, but Harrell really had no shot at defending these guys, especially when the Clippers left him out to dry. Like, I was wondering sometimes why Doc wouldn't sometimes just put Kawhi or Paul George on Jokic just to mix it up. Not saying that they could body up Jokic on the block, but, mix up the coverages a little bit. But if Ty Lue changes the scheme around a little bit, even if he doesn't, Serge Ibaka is a nice addition. I also like that they got Luke Kennard on draft night in that 3-way trade. In place of Landry Shamet. I love Landry Shamet. I think he's a really good shooter. I think his defense is actually not as bad as people make it out to be, but Luke Kennard can handle the ball a little bit more. He can shoot more off the dribble and on the move, and he has had injury issues, but I think the Clippers signing or trading for Luke Kennard actually helped bolster their bench a little bit. They re-signed Marcus Morris Sr. to a 4-year, $64 million contract, which made me pass out.
Yeah, I don't know where that came from.
But regardless, they lost Montrezl Harrell. JaMychal Green was important. Landry Shamet was important. Rodney McGruder hardly played. But my problem with the Clippers, and why I still think there's a large gap between them and the Lakers, despite having Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, depending on, still doesn't matter how you feel about him, is because they haven't addressed the problem of too many cooks in the kitchen and having somebody who can set up the table. When you put somebody like Pat Beverly in the starting lineup and really no other point guards who have the ability to set up the table next to Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, to me, that's you saw it last year when Kawhi Leonard got better as a playmaker, but he's not Ben Simmons. He's not LeBron. He's not Luka. If you put the ball in Kawhi's hands, he's going to give you an efficient 35 and 5 and like 7 rebounds, and it'll give you his defense, right? But there isn't.
I think everything else in his game takes a step back though when he has to play make that much.
Exactly. And I don't think the Clippers address that at all. And I
think the other concern, I know I love Serge Ibaka. I wanted Serge Ibaka to be a Laker instead of Montrezl Harrell. We talked about this last week, but that would have been nasty. The thing is with Serge Ibaka is it still doesn't solve their size issue. When you think about the guys that they have to defend in the West, right?
I think it does a little bit. I think
it helps, but it doesn't fully. I would have loved to see them get an upgrade to Zubac rather than like aside from the Ibaka thing, like get a second big center.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think of like just kind of like a Tyson Chandler type of guy that's just going to rim protect and be there. Like I think JaVale would have been a perfect Clipper.
Or maybe Willie Cauley-Stein if he didn't re-sign.
Right. Like one of those guys.
Or somebody that could jump and, protect the rim a little bit behind Zubac. Because I think he's actually a decent young player, even though Magic threw him under the bus and was poo-pooing his improvements.
Yeah, I feel real bad. But I mean, the thing is, I think he got the short end of the stick of that Laker deal. I think that was a huge panic move by Magic to try to save face. But
how do you feel about Kabengele? Because he was drafted last year in the first round, and obviously, I think he got more notoriety than anything that he was Dikembe Mutombo's nephew, I believe. Right. But do you think maybe he takes a leap and kind of backs up?
Again, like I think when you have a team like the Lakers who are big, you have the Nuggets who run everything through their bigs. Then you have teams coming up. You have the Mavericks with Porzingis. You have the Blazers who still have Nurkic, who's an issue down low, and Zach Collins if he's healthy. You have the Suns who has DeAndre Ayton. You have the Jazz who have Rudy Gobert, who is a defensive issue, and then possibly the Warriors if Wiseman gets going. You have now the top
Rockets if Christian Wood gets going. No, I'm kidding.
you have the top of the West where yes, it's still about skill. But you now have these skilled bigs coming in where if you don't have someone to defend them, Zubac is a throwback center. Zubac is a back to the basket, slow-footed plotting center. And it doesn't, he gets lost in the shuffle against Anthony Davis or Kristaps Porzingis or something like that. The reason why it worked so well with the Lakers last year is because while Dwight and JaVale are those big centers, they're so athletically gifted that they're able to stick with at least defensively and
even at their age.
Right. And challenge.
Yep.
And it comes down to the athleticism. And I don't see any level of that athleticism from the big spot from the Clippers, which is concerning to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I still think Ibaka has some left, but you're right. Like that Zubac isn't vertically gifted. Who knows with Kabengele?
The thing with Ibaka is going to
get.
I think the thing with Ibaka, I love Ibaka, but it's the age, and he's not 7 feet tall. He's not going to be able to stop an Anthony Davis or a Jokic or a Porzingis. If it comes down to crunch time and like they want to get a bucket, they're going to get a good shot.
Yep. Let's just go to the Nuggets because I think the Nuggets are still. Nuggets had an interesting playoffs, and I don't know. We have to do a podcast episode about how much we're maybe underrating or overrating how much the bubble had an effect on these playoff teams, and maybe that there was maybe no crowd kind of helped some teams a little bit or something like that. But I have to give the Nuggets full credit. They made it to the conference finals. They came back from 2 3-1 deficits, the only team in NBA history to do that in the playoffs back to back, I should add. They lost to the Lakers in 5. And notable additions, they added Campazzo, the point guard from overseas. I really don't know too much about him. They got JaMychal Green from the Clippers. They drafted Zeke, I'm gonna butcher his last name, so I'm not gonna try to attempt it. Zeke Naj, I think. And then they, of course, your guy RJ Hampton, who they got in a draft day trade. And then they signed
What's up with them, an Australian point guard? Didn't they draft Dante Exum too?
No, that was the Jazz.
Okay, that's right.
The Jazz. Yeah, that was the other team with high altitude that drafted Dante Exum. And then they signed Isaiah Hartenstein to the minimum. So, of course, the notable subtractions, they lost their best perimeter defender, Jeremy Grant. They lost Mason Plumlee, who was actually a good backup for Jokic because they could run some of the same stuff through Plumlee because he's a good passer. And they lost Torrey Craig. Even with the losses, because that's 3 guys in your rotation, your 8-guy rotation, right? That you like to use. You re-signed Paul Millsap. It was his resurgence in the back half of the playoffs real, or is his age gonna come back to bite him in the ass this season? Who knows? But regardless, they have a tier 1 franchise player in Nikola Jokic, who this season I put over Joel Embiid as the best center in basketball. That debate might actually be rekindled again to start this season, just FYI. But Jokic is a tier 1 top 7 franchise player. He's the best passing big man in history already. And the Nuggets now have, in 2 playoffs, they have been on the cusp of a Western Conference Finals, and they've been to the Western Conference Finals, especially when nobody thought so. What do you think about is there really, to you, is there a difference between the Clippers and Nuggets? Should I have had the Nuggets ahead of the Clippers after they beat the Clippers in the playoffs last year? What's your feeling? What's your temperature on the Nuggets?
So I'm a big Jokic guy, so I agree with you 100% on everything you said there. I am not a Jamal Murray fan. Like, I think Jamal Murray got hot, and he has the tendency to get hot. I think all the accolades he got well deserved in the bubble, but I think that if people expect that level from him consistently, I think that's a little overrating him.
I think he could reach 85% of that on a consistent basis if he finally becomes the 3-point shooter we all expect him to be. Because if you look at his 3-point numbers, like his 3-point percentage, it's not as good as you would think. I mean, he shot 34.6% last year. He's a career 35.8% 3-point shooter. And remember, in Kentucky, he was touted as a 3-point shooter. But if he can reach 80, I think he can reach 85% of that on a consistent basis. And if he does, the Nuggets have themselves a guy who I think could be the 2nd or 3rd best guy on a finals contender. I mean, they were a series away from it, so.
Right. So yeah, I think losing Jeremy Grant is a decent enough loss, but I think Jermichael Green kind of does help them out a little bit to fill that gap. I don't think that's a huge drop off. But yeah, I like the Nuggets. I just think that the star power of Kawhi and Paul George is, again, if they can get it working, if they can get everything functioning correctly, in theory, the Clippers should be better than the Nuggets. And again, they showed that for three games of a series. And for most of the other
for most of game 5 when they were supposed to close it out.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, a lot of it comes down to, I think, what the Clippers are. And it comes down to like the big question that we were asking. Well, so I don't know if you want to get into it now. We do have big questions to talk about later. And one of my big questions.
If one of your big questions is about one of these 2 teams, let's do it.
Oh, so yeah, like one of my big questions about the West is, what are the Clippers, right? And so there was this all the talk going into last season was the Clippers are dogs. They add 2 superstars. They're going to continue to be dogs, and they're going to be this like rough and tumble, hardworking team, which, again, we learned was a total lie and a total fabrication of, like, yeah, you can't just add two star players to a core and think that they're going to retain the same identity. That doesn't happen.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's bared out right with when Harrell was basically. It's paraphrasing a little bit, but Harrell was basically the source of all the.
Yeah, he called them all out.
He called them all out. He was which. I have a little bit of something to say about that. Like, yeah, 2 superstars joined your team. Yeah, they're going to get fucking different treatment. Like, that's just how It is.
No, I totally
but
get
I totally get I also get it from Harold's perspective. Like the Clippers were a fun team to watch in 2017-18 before they added all, or 2018-19 before they added all the stars, right? And they were dogs. Pat Bev was yakking a lot, playing
Pat Bev was being Pat Bev.
Pat Bev was being Pat Bev. Montrezl Harrell was the Energizer Bunny for that crowd. The Clippers won 48 games. They were absolutely fun. But unfortunately, that identity goes away when you add two high-level players such as those two.
Yeah.
So I get what you're saying about, yeah, they were dogs the year before, but adding two superstars and one who's really quiet and one who kind of flames out in the playoffs. And it seems like, honestly, Paul George was kind of the source of the discontent. I think people recognize Kawhi's resume, but
I think Paul George, again, we talked about this last week too. I think Paul George is a joker, and I think that like he carries himself like he does have a resume where he doesn't.
Yeah,
and I think that rubs players.
And he gave himself a nickname.
Yeah, and unless you're Kobe Bryant, you can't do that. And the thing was, Kobe gave himself that nickname when he already had a resume, so you can't, whatever. So the point I'm making is like, I totally agree with you that like, yeah, stars are going to get different treatment. I think there's a certain way to go about doing that, and a certain way that stars have to take that responsibility of being a star. And I don't know if that happens.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, especially like, how can you get chemistry when Kawhi is load managing every other game with what seems like a chronic leg issue?
Something's wrong with him that we don't know about. And
yeah, he's talked about it vaguely before, and reporters have kind of just flat out have been saying it on TV without Kawhi actually saying anything. He's had a chronic leg issue going all the way back to before he left with the Spurs, which I think was the source of his.
I don't know how long he has left to play at this level. Like,
I know that's kind of crazy to think about.
I don't know.
We don't know how long he has left. At an elite level.
Again, I think he's trying to prolong it as much as possible. But you saw last year, like he sort of just ran out of steam
because he started out strong in the Nuggets series, but then you could tell like his lift started to go away. Like by the time Game 7 hit,
he was taking a lot of mid-range jumpers with very little
lift. Yeah,
and you're like, okay, this is weird. So yeah, I don't know how they're going to do that. And again, like I think at their ideal peaks, I think the Clippers are better than the Nuggets. But again, it comes down to, over the course of a series, who's going to pull that out?
And that factor of the guy who is the central hub of an offense, and it doesn't have to be an elite point guard or something, but somebody has to have the playmaking role, and the Nuggets have, right? And then what's that?
It's the head of a snake. Like,
it's the head of the snake. Like Jokic is the ultimate engine of an offense. Like, right. And that's the one thing the Nuggets have. Well, it showed in this past series. The Nuggets have Jokic and the Clippers don't. Even when they have a tier 1 franchise player like Kawhi and maybe a tier 2 player in Paul George. But yeah, to answer your question, I don't know what the Clippers are. We're going to find out this year because I think Ty Lue is an underrated coach. I think his reputation kind of got dampened because it's like, oh, he led LeBron to the finals. How easy is that? It's like, well, actually, that's very hard if you know how LeBron operates and you've seen how LeBron has operated for his whole career. Is very businesslike. He's very high demanding. And Ty Lue, in the halftime of Game 7 of the NBA Finals, got in LeBron's face and told him what it was if they wanted to win. And guess what? They won. I think Ty Lue is an underrated X's and O's guy. I think in terms of the Doc Ty Lue switch out, I actually think it was the right hire, but not because I don't think Ty Lue is necessarily a better coach than Doc Rivers, but I think Ty Lue is more relatable to the players. He's won a championship more recently than Doc Rivers. Doc Rivers and that whole Celtics team is still running on fumes from that 08 championship.
I still don't understand why no one has gotten more clout over a championship than the 08 Celtics.
If you're on the 08 Celtics, you get a television show, you get a spot on the jump, you stay in the head coaching game for 20 years, you get a documentary. No, Doc is a good coach, but in all seriousness, yeah, to answer your question, I don't know what the Clippers are, but I do think they are still contenders. But there is still one team in LA, and I hate to say it, but it's the Lakers.
I can see it. I can see it too, and we're gonna get into this later. I think I could see it where the Clippers are an amazing team, and I can also see it where the Clippers are what they were last year and just dysfunctional as hell.
And then Kawhi and Paul George opt out of their deals, and then the Clippers are back to being the Clippers, which would be funny, and time is a flat circle. But on to tier 3, tier B, the high octane playoff teams. And what I mean by high octane is, you're playing Need for Speed or some racing game or something, and you have a very mid car, not necessarily up there with the best cars, but you need a little nitrous oxide to put yourself in the running, to maybe have a chance to win this race. And having high octane stuff, you need to have some players that'll give you some upside. So my tier 3, and you can let me know if you have any differences in yours, I have Blazers first, Mavericks second, Suns a very close, I would say 2B, and then I have the Jazz.
Okay, so I would just drop the Jazz down a peg.
Okay,
let's talk about a big believer in the Jazz. But...
Let's talk about the Jazz first then, because let's just start with it. So why would you put the Jazz in tier 4 or move them down a tier? What are some of your reservations about good old Salt Lake City?
So I'm not a big Donovan Mitchell guy. I think that he is pretty inefficient as a player, and he didn't take the strides that the huge steps that I thought he was going to take. Again, I was a fan of him as a rookie, and then that sophomore year, I didn't really see enough of him taking a jump, and then just continuing on and on. Like, I don't think he's progressed the way that I thought he's going to progress. I think he's an all-star player. I don't think he is a franchise level, like, carry a franchise guy.
Mm-hmm.
And then for Rudy Gobert, I don't know. Obviously, the rim protection and the defense and the airspace protection is just fantastic. But offensively, I think he's pretty limited, and I don't think that they necessarily use him enough in pick and roll or enough to the strength of his usage, where he's just kind of there on offense, and he's just there to he just clogs the lane, and it makes it very weird, especially for a player like Donovan Mitchell that wants to get to the basket. I love Joel Ingles. I think Joel Ingles is highly underrated, but we got to remember too that they have. I think they still have Bogdanovich, right? But he was
hurt. He was hurt, surgery. And then he had surgery before
the bubble. So he's still coming off of this injury that I guarantee you hasn't probably fully healed, because he had it right before the bubble. So I don't know where they're going to be the rest of the year. I think they overpaid for Jordan Clarkson. I've never been a Jordan Clarkson guy.
Yeah.
So there's just weirdness on this roster. I like Derek Favors. I don't know how much Mike Conley has left in the tank. There's questions where I think they're going to be a playoff team, but I don't put them in this echelon with these. Like, I see the Mavericks, Blazers, Suns as like teams that could on any given day take a series off the Clippers or the Nuggets. I don't see the Jazz doing that.
So I will push back a little bit on your take on a Donovan Mitchell, and I say that as somebody who, I'm a Donovan Mitchell fan. I liked him in college, and I thought he should have been drafted high, but there is some element that it's true where maybe he didn't progress the way we thought he would, but I also think a lot of it was people, big names who cover the game, were throwing out crazy ass Dwayne Wade comparisons, because Dwayne Wade found instant success his rookie year. Second year was a beast. Third year, his team's in the finals, right? I obviously that is a high mark for Mitchell. That is unfair to him, but he improved last year, efficiency wise, scoring wise, and in the playoffs, especially in round 1 against the Jazz, I thought he took a big step as somebody who attacked the rim relentlessly, as somebody who was making plays out of pick and roll. That is the Donovan Mitchell that I think those big media heads were talking about. The guy who is unstoppable, athletic, has a quick first step. He needs to become better with his shot selection, I think, and become a better three-point shooter. But the reason I put the Jazz in the high-octane category is because what I saw from Donovan Mitchell is absolutely somebody that could beat anybody, any one of those three high-octane playoff teams in a series. I could see them, I mean, we saw it with the Nuggets this past year. I could see them beating the Nuggets in a series too, but so much has to go right. And you're right about the Bojan Bogdanovic thing. I actually forgot he had surgery on his wrist prior to the bubble. So I didn't forget. I just didn't think about the timeline that it would take for him to come back.
100% right now.
He's not coming back 100%.
So I don't know where he's at.
But I think 60% or 50% of Bojan is better than nothing because he was a central figure in some of the Jazz's best lineups. So, that's part of
the reason. His injury is part of the reason why I have them so low.
Yeah, but I think if he comes back in any form, I just think that's another bit of juice the Jazz need that I would personally put him in the tier 3. And I haven't given up on Mike Conley yet. He had a rough start to the season last year. I think he was adjusting to a new team. The fact that he's not the only point guard or guard in the starting lineup that had the ball a lot, like he did in Memphis. I think he had to adjust to that with having Donovan Mitchell next to him. And towards the end of the season and into the bubble, he was actually getting closer to Memphis, like, if not prime Memphis Grizzlies, Mike Conley, but to the Mike Conley of, the last 2 years before he dipped for Memphis. And then, of course, bringing back Derek Favors, there's not going to be that weird, does Gobert and Favors work together in the front court? Is it a lineup you can play in the playoffs? Derek Favors now coming back for the mid-level, kind of solidifies his role. He could be the backup center because he's still a damn good player. And, I thought it was a loss for the Pelicans until they got Steven Adams to help out a little bit. But having a good player like Derek Favors to back up Rudy Gobert, it will give you more lineup flexibility. You'll be able to mix and match players more. And you can go Gobert and Favors if the matchup calls for it in a certain series. But the Bojan injury is big because he was in some of the Jazz's best lineups. Let me give you some lineup data here from Cleaning the Glass. So a lineup of Donovan Mitchell, Royce O'Neal, Bogdanovic, Ingles, and Gobert played over 1,100 possessions, had a net rating of 15.2. Their offensive rating was 119.5, which would have been tops in the league. Bojan is a useful shooter. He's a playmaker. He's a guy with size that could guard bigger wings. He's not a superstar defender or anything like that, but he's somebody you could throw at LeBron and throw at Kawhi and Paul George along with Royce O'Neal and a few others. Jordan Clarkson, agreed. Overpaid contract. But there is a premium on bench scoring in the league, and they are the Jazz, so they need all the players they could get. So it's an overpay for sure, a massive overpay, but Clarkson was a factor in their rotation last year, especially as a bench scorer. I just like the roster of the Jazz better this time around, especially with Favors coming back. So I'd put him in tier 3, but they have a lot of questions, which I guess is why you put him in a tier 4.
Yeah, so I put him in tier 4, and we'll talk about it because my other big question that I had for this podcast was about the Mavericks and Luka Doncic. And so the thing is, so
do you want to talk about the Mavericks?
Well, I just want to bring this up real quick.
Okay.
The main crux of that argument for me for Luka is like, what is Luka in year 3? So year 3 to me is like, it's year 3 is usually the year where like superstars step up, where like you've had time in the league, you see the big, usually in like superstar franchise guys, you see the jump in year 3.
Yeah,
that's usually when you see it. And so last year I didn't see that jump in Donovan Mitchell, and like his improvement, he did improve, but it's like the staggered, it's like the usual sort of all-star player, solid player improvement where he's just getting better and better and better, where it's not the huge jump where you're like, oh, he gets it now.
Yeah.
Right?
Also, Luka is kind of an alien, so I don't want to.
Sure.
I don't want to.
No, I'm not putting that on him. But like for me, it's stuff where it's like when I'm looking for
there's
my franchise guy,
checkpoints that you have.
Yeah, when I'm looking for like my franchise guy of like, cool, this is my cornerstone for the next decade.
Yep.
I don't see it from Mitchell, and I see him being like a Bradley Beal, where he's great. He's an all-star. He's awesome. He's great, but I don't know if he can carry a team.
Yeah,
You know what I'm saying?
I have Donovan Mitchell in my tier 2.5, which is talented players on the rise that are close to tier 2 or were in tier 2 but have made an all-star team or two. So Luka, and yeah, compared to, there's checkpoints with franchise players, right? I totally agree with you there.
And so like when I look at these other teams, I see Luka, I see Dame, and I see Devin Booker, right? And I'm like, okay,
and I would absolutely take Devin Booker over Donovan Mitchell. By the way, I've had that take for a long time.
Yeah. So again, I think we're on the same page. Where to me, I'm looking at those teams, I'm going, okay, if any of these guys takes any kind of jump or like anything at all,
then they would separate themselves
easily
from the Jazz,
separate into tier 2, right?
Yeah.
And where with the Jazz, I don't see that ever happening.
Right.
And I don't see that potential, and so I would drop them down into the tier where I put the Warriors and the Rockets, where they're a solid playoff team, but I don't see them taking that extra step to where, okay, now I'm scared of them if I'm a Clippers team or a Lakers or a Nuggets.
Yeah, I guess I am putting stock a little bit in Mitchell taking a leap, but I guess I'm putting more of stock in the collective sum of the parts because I do like this roster a lot. And
I totally get where you're coming from, but for me, it comes down to Mitchell, and like I don't see him in this. I don't see him being the leader and the go-to guy that these other teams have. Where, like, to me, the Mavericks, the Blazers, and the Suns would scare me if I'm the Lakers, the Clippers, or the Nuggets.
Right, and we have talked about the Jazz probably for the longest time that we ever will on this podcast. But real quickly, I wanted to ask you. So you obviously have the Jazz out. Who do you have in order? Is your tier 3 in order at all? Or do you have a quick order in mind? Because I have Blazers, Mavericks, and Suns. That's how I'd rank them in order. But I think the Mavericks and Suns are closer.
I would have the Blazers, Suns, Mavericks just because Chris Paul and just because I know what the Suns are at this point. The Mavs, I don't really know because of Kristaps' injury, and I don't know where they're at.
See, I thought about that. I thought about KP's knee injury. Luka's going to have some new teammates, but at the end of the day, I mean, it's not hyperbole to say that Luka Doncic is on a trajectory of being a top 10 player of all time, right? Or am I jumping the gun too soon? Because I feel like I'm not, but
a top what player?
A top 10 player ever. He's on that trajectory right now. Like, I'm not saying he is right now, but I'm saying the trajectory he has showed so far. How can you not say that right now?
Yeah, no, I totally get where you're coming from. I think he's going to be, if he doesn't get hurt and he continues his trajectory, I think he is. I think he goes down in history as one of the greatest players of all time. I don't think it's a question. The question of top 10 is tough. Because my top 10 is insanely, like, Luka needs to do a lot.
Oh yeah, for sure. I am absolutely admitting that I am putting a fuck ton of pressure on Luka. Well, he doesn't care about what I have to say, but
like, let me think real quick of like, there's no one I can see.
Because think about
getting knocked out of my top 10.
Luka was top 5 in MVP voting as a 21-year-old, and the only 21-year-old to do that was Timothy Theodore Duncan. And I have Tim Duncan as my 5th best player of all time.
Really? You have him that high?
Yeah, I have him higher than Kobe. I know that. I know we'll have debates about that later, but I would take Duncan. I have Kobe 7 or 8. I have Duncan 5.
So to me, my top 5 to me it's just real quick. It's Jordan, LeBron, Magic, Bird, and Kareem.
So I have LeBron, Jordan, Kareem, Magic, and Duncan.
Okay.
And then I'd probably put Bird 6. Yeah. And then
because I would have Duncan like 7, 8. I'd have Kobe 7, 8.
Mm.
I have them really close.
Yeah.
I say that I think I have Shaq in there too.
Yeah. But I say that because I think Luka, he's starting to check the checkpoints that Tim Duncan is checking off. And I think if you're checking off checkpoints as your career progresses at the rate that Tim Duncan is, I think you're going somewhere. And I wanted to put the Suns ahead of them, but at the end of the day, like, the Mavericks have a top 7 already player at 22, and they surrounded him with big ass wings. I love the offseason the Mavericks had. They traded for Josh Richardson, who he was miscast in Philadelphia. The fit was worse than I thought it would be. But if Richardson goes back to that role of catch and shoot threes and being a primary defender, maybe make a little bit as a third or fourth ball handler, not a secondary ball handler like he was miscast in Philly, that is a great pickup for the Mavericks. They get Josh Green. They have Tyler Bay. They get Tyrell Terry to replace the Seth Curry role, because I think Tyrell Terry with his shooting could actually get some minutes right away, especially under Carlisle, with how guys like Jalen Brunson and Trey Burke have succeeded in his system. The big question, obviously, to me is the Porzingis injury, because earlier in the season last year, there was that weird funky stat that when Luka and KP were on the floor together, it was like a -1 on the net rating or whatever. But obviously by the end of the season, they started playing KP at the 5 more, especially after Dwight Powell went down, and the Mavericks offense literally jumped through the fucking roof, and the net rating flipped on its head.
A lot of the stuff that people weren't realizing too was that early in the season, Kristaps was coming off that he hadn't played in 2 years.
He hadn't played in 2 years, and
he was still trying to relearn how to play. And the thing is, learning how to play with an actual point guard, he didn't have shit in
New York. No, he did not.
So, I think a lot of the stuff was Kristaps. A lot of criticism from Kristaps early on in the season was he's just standing out in the 3-point line, where it's he doesn't know how to he's testing out this new knee of his. Yeah, he doesn't know. He's going to be where he's going to be.
But that goes back to he's going to be having to knock the rust off and testing out his knee again this year, and that should be scaring me. But I don't know what it. I have unwavering confidence in Luka Doncic. I think Luka Doncic is going to eventually become a 37% 3-point shooter, which is another way for him to improve, which is insane to say. The Mavericks have said. The Mavericks,
it's insane how kind of bad a 3-point shooter he is, relatively speaking, compared to the rest of his game, but he's still putting up crazy numbers.
Yep. And the Mavericks have decided we're going to put a bunch of big wings around him. And I just like how they're building their team right now. But the Blazers, we need to talk about the Blazers finally getting a wing that Dame and CJ deserve. And that is my guy, Robert Covington. Came up straight out of the process.
You don't mean Rodney Hood getting healthy?
Well, no, I will get to Rodney Hood later. It does suck that he's coming off of this Achilles injury, because I actually thought in the playoffs in 2019 he was good for the Blazers, and he was good for the Blazers going into the year before the injury happened. But Robert Covington is a really good get for the Blazers. Kind of people, nerd Twitter kind of overrated him a little bit. Process Twitter and Sixers Twitter, which I'm a part of, we love Robert Covington unconditionally, so we're fine with all the praise he gets. But that is the perfect guy for the Blazers, who had the 27th rated defense on cleaning the glass. To get somebody like Robert Covington, who is a menace off ball, average one-on-one defender, has average lateral speed, but where he makes his bones on defense is just disrupting everything off the ball, being a good weak side shot blocker for his position, real good at switches, rotating. That is exactly the type of wing Dame and CJ have needed, coupled with Gary Trent Jr., who was a star in the bubble, but was already kind of showing signs of being a 3-and-D player during the season. He shot 38% from 3 going into the bubble, shot 50% in the bubble from 3, and was a tough, hard-nosed defender. The Blazers are starting to stack up some defensive players. They're getting some really good defenders back. I think Nurkic is very underrated. He's not a leaper, so his rim protection numbers probably won't be there, but he knows where to be. He knows how to rotate and communicate. Zach Collins, if he can just stay fucking healthy for once, he would be he has shown flashes. He could be another big defensive piece that can also stretch the floor, rebound, get nasty in the paint. I just like what the Blazers did this offseason, and I think with Dame, who has over the last 3 years elevated himself as a tier 1 franchise player to me, the Blazers, I think, are the highest octane playoff team. And if they're in the Western Conference Finals again, for the second time in 3 years, I won't be surprised.
Yeah. I think to me the big concern is with them defensively, but Covington helps them so much in that regard. And I think that it depends on where they are injury-wise. Because they had so many injuries over the past year, and in the bubble they had injuries. Dame had an injury at the very end there.
Mm-hmm.
Can Zach Collins stay healthy? I think Zach Collins is still a valuable piece to that puzzle.
Yep.
But again, can he stay healthy?
My guy Harry Giles.
Yeah,
even though Sacramento inexplicably declined to pick up his qualifying offer, but that's neither here nor there.
They just have pieces where you go, yeah, this works.
I actually wouldn't be surprised if Harry Giles at some point started getting more minutes than Collins, because for what the Blazers run with their bigs, Giles is kind of perfect for that. Yeah, he's a little bit skinnier if you put him at the 5, but a guy who's a really good passer, can do dribble handoffs with Dame and CJ, just has a real nasty attitude on the court. Sacramento loves Harry Giles he brought it on the floor every time he got a chance to play. Played like it was his last. He also just has some really good skills that obviously made him a presumptive number 1 pick when he was in high school before all the knee injuries hit. That's another high upside play, low risk, high upside that I think could help the Blazers in terms of hitting the nitrous oxide in this race. Derrick Jones Jr. didn't really play much in Miami in the playoffs. Did get in the rotation a little bit during the season. He's another athletic wing. Not a really great 3-point shooter, although he was kind of decent in the corners, but that's another wing. Like, the Blazers are just stacking up on any wings they can get, and I just think that's only going to help Dame and CJ. So, the other high-octane playoff team, we talked about the Suns. We know what they are. They have Chris Paul and Devin Booker. I have the Suns slightly behind the Mavericks, but I really so badly wanted to put the Suns above the Mavericks. But
I just think the pick and roll game, to me, it's more than Booker. It's more than Booker with Chris Paul. It's DeAndre Ayton.
It's DeAndre Ayton for sure.
To me, Chris Paul unlocks everything that DeAndre Ayton is good at, and is going to make him an all-star.
Pick and pop, it now. Entry passes into the post.
He's a smart player. He has good hands. He has touch on his shot. He's good inside feel.
Yeah, and he makes quick decisions too. Like, he doesn't waste his time with deciding what to do on offense. If he's rolling to the basket, he catches it, boom, he's up. If he pops out there and catches the ball, it's a shot. There's no like, oh, should I make a play here? Should I dribble? He knows what he's going to do. And having somebody like Chris Paul, like you said, who is one of the smartest players of all time, that's only going to help him, right?
Right. And again, his defensive growth over the last year has been incredible, and I think if he continues on that trajectory, there's no reason why he can't challenge to be one of the best two-way bigs in the conference.
Oh, right.
There's no reason why he can't do that, and it's going to be interesting to see. To me, then it makes Devin Booker's game so much easier when you have to worry about those two, and then Booker can just cook in the corner.
Yep, and it's going to be nasty just seeing him attack closeouts and. It's an upgrade, obviously, from Ricky Rubio, but you just saw what having an adult at the point guard position last year did for the Suns. Even Cam Payne had a little bit of a resurgence in the bubble. He's back on a minimum, but I don't think he's going to play that much. But they re-signed Saric. They brought in Jay Crowder, who is definitely going to be in a lot of closing lineups, I imagine, along with Mikal Bridges. They still have Cam Johnson, who was a fixture as a rookie in some of the Suns' best lineups, and people are killing the Jalen Smith pick when it happened this draft. I'm just going to say I'm not going to judge shit on what James Jones does in the draft, because they seem to have the philosophy of, we like a guy, we're going to get it. Now, we could question the value of it sometimes, but it worked out with Cam Johnson. Jalen Smith has defensive upside and can shoot as a big. I could see why they made the pick, especially to replace Aaron Baines. Abdul Nader, he was kind of a throw-in in the Chris Paul trade. I actually think Abdul Nader has been on the trajectory a lot the last few years in OKC as a 3-and-D wing, so that's another wing. Just the Suns have really... They needed somebody like Chris Paul. And if Chris Paul can stay healthy, which is always the big if, and he has a season that's close to as good as it was in OKC. I wouldn't be surprised to see them on the cusp of a Western Conference Finals appearance. I just think Devin Booker's that good of an offensive player. I think Ayton is already on the way to being one of the best bigs in the league, hands down. Saric was a good re-sign. They still have Mikal Bridges, and they signed my guy, Javon Carter. They re-signed him off of his rookie deal. He has a new contract now. And just imagine you're a point guard and you're having to deal with Chris Paul for some of the game, and then Javon Carter comes in and picks you up 94 feet for the rest of it. That would be just hell. But I love the Suns.
I think that there's been so much talk, and deservedly so, for the Lakers and the Blazers about the best offseason. And I think the Suns have quietly had a top 3 offseason in the league.
I think they might have had the best, honestly, because I just love when teams know how to build around their star players. Especially over the last few years, I've come to appreciate competent GMs who look at the roster and say, this guy.
You mean you don't stack bigs around not 3-point shooters?
Yeah, apparently that's not a good thing to do. And also, it is easy to look at Chris Paul and be like, yeah, that's a perfect fit for any team. But if you looked at the Suns' point guard situation after they broke up that 3-headed monster of Isaiah Thomas, Dragic, and Bledsoe way back, it's not been good. So, speaking of point guards, one of these playoff teams in the next tier has the second greatest point guard ever. And
oof.
Yep. Oh, well, you're going to know as this podcast goes along, I am a Steph Curry stan. I've been a huge Steph Curry fan since his days at Davidson. I have tracked him and the Splash Brothers all the way up till now. And I think with all the accolades and everything Steph Curry has done, I think he's the second best point guard ever, behind Magic, obviously. Obviously, there's an analytical argument for Chris Paul. There's Jason Kidd, all that stuff. Whatever. Throw those arguments at me at Twitter later when you hear this episode.
We're not going to get into it, but I don't rate Steph Curry that highly as a point guard.
Oh, I really. Let's just talk about. Let's just talk about
it if you want.
No, I want it. No, because it'll go on for about half an hour because I will defend Steph Curry. But
you don't have to. I
know. Again, I know. I don't have to defend him to you. But
real quickly though, my thing is just I think he is the greatest shooter of all time, and I don't think that's a question. I don't think that's anything else. I think that every other skill that he has though benefits from the shooting. Where I think the playmaking, the dribbling, everything benefits from the idea that he is the greatest shooter of all time. I don't think as
100% the shot helps him out, but I still think he's a very good passer even without it, and his ball handling is still top notch. Not Kyrie level, but that shot definitely helps.
I think if he was an average shooter, he'd be a solid starter all-star. I don't think he's a Hall of Famer.
Yeah, but
if he was an average shooter.
Even then, you have to take the whole package. Like,
but again, that's my only thing with Steph Curry. And so for me, it comes down to a thing of, and we'll talk about this as we get deeper into this podcast. But my philosophy is always this thing of, there's a difference to me between a point guard that can score and a scorer that plays point guard. Where I think Steph Curry to me is the latter, where he's a scorer that plays point guard, and I don't consider him like a true point guard, at least in my mind. Where I think he is looking for his shot more than he's looking for a setup.
Oh yeah, for sure. But I also think,
so like to me again, it goes to my personal bias of like I value like true point guards over that. So like to me, I value like an Isaiah Thomas or a Jason Kidd or a Chris Paul over that.
Oh, for sure.
Rather than like someone that like, to me, like AI, Derrick Rose, or like scorers that play point guard. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so to me, I don't value that as highly as something like as a Steph Curry who is looking for his shot, or is like as I view mainly as a scorer.
Right. He's not.
So again, it's nothing against Steph Curry. I just wouldn't put him that highly.
Right.
On my own personal list.
Well, I do want to revisit this topic later, but I did this long intro that I had no idea was going to go down this hole. I did this long intro because the Warriors it was our fault that we didn't talk about this last week. It should have really been our first topic. The Klay Thompson news to start the morning on draft day fucking sucked.
Yeah, that kind of dampened the entire mood around the draft for me.
The entire, like, almost the season, honestly, because I was so looking forward to seeing the Splash Brothers back. I was a huge... I love
Klay Thompson, by the way.
What's up?
I love Klay Thompson. I don't know if
you hate I love Klay him
Thompson,
too.
If you hate Klay Thompson, what the fuck's wrong with you?
That quote needs to go up on a wall or something. Like, if you hate Klay Thompson, what the fuck is wrong with you? He is one of the coolest dudes in the NBA. If there was like an urban, if you looked up in the Urban Dictionary the word vibes, there would just be a picture of Klay Thompson right there with his dog Rocco. But I was so looking forward to seeing the Splash Brothers play again because, like I said, and I'm probably going to be called a hipster or something, but not to sound like a hipster, but I was there from the beginning, man. No, but no, like I love.
Are you an I Believe team guy?
No, I'm not the We. I was a fan of the We Believe Warriors, but I'm not a Warriors fan. But I do love the Warriors and the Bay Area.
Love me some Baron Davis.
Yeah, I love me some Baron Davis just yakking all over Andre Karolinko, even though they lost that series after upsetting the Mavs.
The dunk on Dirk was so good.
Yep. But I was very pro trading Monte Ellis at the time when they got Andrew Bogut and paved the way for Klay Thompson to start as a rookie because I had him on my fantasy team as a rookie. And Klay Thompson was going bonkers sometimes, and I'm like, oh my God. And I'd watch these games because I have NBC Sports Bay Area when I was in college, and I'd be like, wow, this backcourt is like special. Like you could tell, like it's a special shooting backcourt. And then when the rumors started of them wanting to swap Klay Thompson for Kevin Love, I was having an aneurysm. I was like, why would you do that? And then Jerry West kind of, he reaffirmed me and my high status in the NBA circle. No, not really. But he said, if you trade Klay Thompson, I quit. I'm done working for you guys. So Klay Thompson has been a Warriors fixture for a long time. And if he was healthy this year, I would have had the Warriors in the contender tier because
I would have too.
Because
if he was healthy, I would have put him in there.
I have so much respect for the big three. I still think even Draymond, as he's older, I think if his team was a contender this year, you would have seen the old Draymond. Like, remember in the 2018-19 season when Draymond was struggling, he was fat. He even admitted it. And he had to basically work his way into shape by the playoffs. And then he became really like 90% old Draymond. I really think Draymond would have came in this year. I still think he will, but I just have so much respect for that big three. I think Steph Curry is still a tier 1 franchise player. And now the Warriors are in this weird spot where Klay Thompson has suffered a devastating leg injury on top of the one he suffered the year before, but this one's the worst. It's Achilles. It's an Achilles injury. And now the Warriors are trying to fill 80% of Klay Thompson's production with Kelly Oubre and Kent Bazemore. You still have James Wiseman, Andrew Wiggins. Yeah, they're all, well, minus Andrew Wiggins. Kelly Oubre and Kent Bazemore are really good players. Kent Bazemore is a really solid role player. Andrew Wiggins is like, we're in year 6 of, I think people are going to sleep on Andrew Wiggins this year. I think he's going to have a great year with the Warriors. I'm not buying into that at all. But they still have Wiseman. They still have Draymond. They still have Eric Paschall, Jordan Poole. They still have players that are young enough to maybe take some mini leaps. I think the Warriors are still a playoff team. It just sucks because I think Steph Curry is somehow in this position where this is kind of like a season where this could affect his legacy in a weird way. And it hasn't with me. But among the bigger basketball community, casual fans, not even casual fans, but all the types of sports fans.
Sure.
Where they want to see if Steph Curry can carry a playoff team, if they could carry a team to the finals. When he's already done that in his career, sans KD, sacrificed bringing KD in, and I would still argue Steph was the most important player on those KD teams and not KD himself, who is the better player. Now Steph Curry has found himself where if he doesn't make the playoffs or, have a crazy round one performance, his legacy might take a hit, and I think that's ridiculous. What say you?
I am on the side of Steph does have games where he kind of disappears in the playoffs, or where he hasn't had he's had bad performances, and in the same way James Harden has. I put them kind of in the same camp of Harden obviously has worse games, but I think that to me the Golden State Warriors thing has always been a collective sum of the pieces. The greatness of the Warriors is always a collective sum of the pieces rather than a singular great player. And I think that again, Steph gets a lot of credit because he's the head of the snake, like we keep talking about it. He's running this team. Everything runs through Steph, and it's so important. And his shooting is kind of the key to opening up that entire offense. I'm not a big Draymond Green guy. I've always thought that he was I always thought he was a product of the Warriors system rather than a vital piece.
I think on offense more so. Defense, that's all him. He's one of the most special defenders I've ever seen.
I think to me it comes down to his intelligence as a player. I don't think his intelligence and his basketball IQ defensively. I think where it gets a little out of control. I think he's a great defensive player. I think where it gets a little out of control is when you start comparing him to a Dennis Rodman. I think that's a little out. I think that's ridiculous to me. I don't see that at all, and I think that that's completely.
I think they're a little bit different, but I do think Draymond has. I just think he's so smart. He does.
And it comes down to his intelligence as a player. To me, it comes down to Dennis Rodman was smart and also a physical freak of nature.
Oh yeah,
absolutely, an athletic marvel of a human being that
absolutely
was. To me, Dennis Rodman. If you built the perfect defensive player, you would build Dennis Rodman. And so the idea to me of people were saying that, remember, because the talk when Draymond was in his prime, the talk was that Draymond Green was the defensive GOAT. And I was
I don't agree. Obviously, I don't. I don't. With that.
I was this is totally wrong. What are you talking about? I remember I got into an argument with a friend of mine that was saying, because my argument was always that if you take Draymond off of the Warriors and you put him on an average team, that he is a solid player, but he is not an all-star, and he is not a top tier player.
Mm-hmm.
And again, defensively, yes, he's super intelligent, but if you don't have the players around you to help make that defense work, then it devalues you as a defensive player to some degree.
Well, I think his ability to switch and rim protect still as a small guy was what he's the linchpin. He was the linchpin.
Oh yeah, no, I totally agree. But again, that comes down to the reason why he's able to do that, and the reason why he's able to all of his skills are amplified by being on this great defensive Warriors team and having these other great players around him to help move the chess pieces. So to me, it's if you're on a chessboard, right? He's not the queen. He's not the piece that you are. He's not the most powerful piece on the board. He is a knight or a bishop or a rook, where in the right scenarios, yes, he with everything else around him, he can control an entire game, but he's not the one that's going to control it on his own. And so to me, when you have someone was saying to me that Draymond Green, if you put him on an average team, that he's still an all NBA player.
I think he's an all defensive team candidate for sure, but not an all NBA player. No. Yeah, I do think his defense is singular to himself. He transforms defenses, I think, but offensively, he doesn't have handle to dribble in the half court. One of the only reasons he has been able to rumble down the court for years is because you can't leave Steph and Clay, and so that gives him room.
The spacing on the court is ridiculous.
Yeah, the spacing on the court is ridiculous. So when you have a big trying to guard Draymond in transition, you're just oh shit, what do I do? Because he can get by bigger bigs with the handle, but if he doesn't have Steph and Clay there, then the passing windows get tighter. Even though I think he's a good passer than what he gets credit for, it is absolutely amplified by the fact that he's playing in some of the best spacing in NBA history. But my big question, this is my first big picture question, was this preseason, before Klay Thompson's injury, was this the last time we will ever put the Warriors in the contender category?
No.
And let's project out to the next 3 to 5 years.
No, because I still think with Steph and when Klay comes back, I still think those two guys, that backcourt is special, and I think that's a special enough backcourt to like carry your team. And I think that depending on what Wiseman is, again, we talked about what Wiseman's floor is. I think even now he's a good enough big to
add value to wins.
Add value. Yeah, you add value to that team. And again, he's in the perfect scenario where he can learn and he can be the player that he is now while still working on things that he can still contribute now and be useful now while learning how to do the other stuff. And I think again, if he can grow in the next, like we kept talking with Luka, the 3-year push, right? So I think the way that Steph and Klay both play, they're not going to lose that much in the next 2 to 3 years. And I think that if Wiseman can take a step, then they're easily still in that conversation, especially now when you look at potentially who's gone. Like in 2 to 3 years, is LeBron still at that level? Is Harden are Harden and Westbrook still in the West, and are they still at that level? If you look at, obviously the Mavericks will be still up there, but the Blazers,
right,
depending on what their injury situation's like, and you keep looking at them, I think down the line the Warriors are set up pretty well for success down the line.
My only concern, I do have a few concerns. I'm inclined to say yes, but when I look at projecting out for the next few years, Klay Thompson wasn't just the second greatest shooter in NBA, or isn't just the second greatest shooter in NBA history. He's also has been one of the best defenders for a long time. And I think
he's never going to do that again.
He's never going to be that again. And I think that was such an integral part of the Warriors and what they do, because saying 3-and-D is too simplistic for Klay Thompson, obviously, but you get what I'm saying. He's the
3-and-D.
He's like supercharged 3-and-D guy, like 44% from three, whatever, and is just clamps on defense. I don't know if he's able to do that anymore.
The thing that's funny about Klay is yes, saying 3-and-D kind of shortchanges him a little bit, but that is all he is.
Yeah, that on this team, yeah.
He is all he is 3-and-D, but he is he is the 3-and-D guy.
Yeah, he was born in it, molded by it. No. But and also he is probably the best heat check guy I've ever seen in my life, and that includes Steph. I was there. I remember going batshit crazy when he had the 37 in the third quarter against the Kings. I was watching
with the 2 dribbles.
Yeah, and that was Indiana with the 60 points in the 11 dribbles. Right. But the 37-point third quarter, my roommates I was watching it in my room going fucking nuts, and my roommates were like, dude, what's all that? I'm like, Klay Thompson just had a 30. I was like speaking all fast. Like, I was like, Klay Thompson had a 37-point third quarter, and it was wild. But I guess I would put the Warriors in the contender category, I imagine, a few more times. I just have so much respect for Steph that there is no way I'm dropping him. I wasn't going to do it last year either. Like, I think with a healthy Steph, the Warriors are a playoff team. And
I think that speaks to the West, though. I think that the West is so kind of top heavy. But where, I don't think the West is necessarily the strongest. I think that Steph by himself could carry a team down into the playoffs in the West.
My other playoff team, the 9th team, so there's only 8 seeds, 9 teams, but I think if they stay together, this is all pending if James and Russ are 1, traded, or 2, go into training camp unhappy, and that leads to some friction, or 3, maybe they just stay together and stick it out this season. But I still have the Rockets there. Even with James and Russ there, I would still put them behind the Warriors. I don't know what the Rockets are doing. I don't know what the plan is. I don't know what kind of cost-saving measures Tillman Fertitta will pull out of his book to figure out what's going on. He's already sold off some picks. He did sign Christian Wood, a signing that I do like a lot, even though I joked about him earlier. He is another process sixer and got paid, cashed out after building it.
I think he's underrated. People don't understand how good he is.
Yeah, no, he is definitely he's an underrated player. The Rockets also brought in Sterling Brown. They also brought in DeMarcus Cousins, who on a minimum deal.
I love that pickup. I love that potential pickup.
I don't know what's going to happen to Houston, but I'm just out on this team. I'm out on the Westbrook-Harden duo. If you have to trade your center away to bring in Robert Covington, and I get the method behind it, Daryl Morey really had no choice. I think he was just hamstrung by the new owner and James Harden demanding a Westbrook trade. That's what Tim McMahon of ESPN made it sound like. You have to trade away your center to bring in Robert Covington so you can have 3 shooters on the court or 4 shooters next to your non-shooting point guard. I'm not a big fan of this team. I love Harden. I'm in the minority as a Harden fan. I understand. But as a team, I just don't like this Rockets team. They're probably going to win 48. It would be on a 48-50 win pace just because they'll have Harden and Westbrook. But the stink on this team, there's a lot off with this team. I feel bad for Steven Silas, whose first head coaching job is dealing with this bullshit. And regardless, though, Rockets are a playoff team, so I have them in the tier. I don't know how much more you have to add about the Rockets, but
yeah, that's pretty much. I'm out too. I'm not a big Harden guy to begin with, so I feel like
a betrayal of the lefty gang. How dare you?
I feel like I've been super negative this whole podcast, but like I'm not a Harden guy. I'm not.
You don't like scoring guards, do you?
I don't like Harden. It's again, we've talked about this before. I don't like the gameplay, the style of play. I think that he was better in OKC. Like I love the cutting movement.
Early Houston too. I have to say early Houston.
Yeah, and I love that Harden. I hate the ISO ball dribble at the top of the key for 20 seconds and then
step back
get a foul
12 times a game.
Yeah, I find it incredibly boring to watch, and I find it like I don't think that works over the course of a series when a team only has to focus on playing you 7 times.
Yeah, and hence by him being gassed all the time. In these playoffs, But yeah. I love watching him cook though. Like that's the main thing with me. I also think that I kind of like it when a trend happens and people get mad about it, but the trend keeps happening. And so I guess that's kind of why I enjoy Harden like trolling his way to the free throw line and stuff. Because I also think there's like an element of genius to that. It's like, yeah, okay.
Oh, it's like the meme I made. It's like this is horrible. But it's beautiful.
Yeah, it's horribly beautiful. It's horribly beautiful. And I guess
he learned how to play the game, right? Like he just learned how, like, oh, if I do this, I'll get a foul every time.
Oh,
like,
if I put my arm under my defender's arm and swing up, that's a foul. Like he knows how to game the system. So right. I guess we're talking more about Harden than the actual fucking Rockets team.
But like, there's nothing else to talk about with this Rockets team. This Rockets team's garbage.
Yeah.
Like we know what it is. It's trash. It's gonna lose. Whatever. It begins and ends with Harden. Like to me, the style of dribble at the top of the key for 20 seconds over the course of a 7-game series, where all I have to do is stop you and win the series.
Yep.
It works in the regular season when I'm playing back to backs and I'm not thinking about you all the time. But when my only job is to stop you. You can tell too when they play playoff series, if they play good teams that like match up, they win 1 or 2 games early, and then afterwards, once teams figure it out, it's done.
Yep, I totally agree 100%. Let's just move on from the shitty Rockets and their broke owner. Tier 5, the play-in game hunting. We have play-in games this year, my friend.
Yeah, I'm very excited for it.
I'm very excited for it. It was a success in the bubble, especially when teams were trying to bust their ass towards the end of the regular season to get into the play-in bubble. But I have 5 teams, or not 5 teams. I have 3 teams in this category real quick. I have the Spurs, Grizzlies, and Thunder. The Spurs, I have them there mainly because they have DeMar DeRozan and LaMarcus Aldridge, and why they are not
the mid-range gods.
The mid-range gods. They have young players around them too that I like. And they still have the greatest coach in NBA history in Greg Popovich, even though he's kind of tailed off secretly the last few years. He's still a good coach. They added one of my favorite point guards, Trey Jones, got him out of Duke. They also added Devin Vassell, who I know you liked quite a bit. Out goes Bryn Forbes and Marco Bellinelli, which really wasn't that big of a deal. But the Spurs, I have them at the top. Grizzlies, I have second, mainly because I think they overachieved a little bit last year relative to how young they are, and I think they're going to come back down to earth, but because there's a play-in game, their record might just get them in. So to me, I have them lower than you do. I have them slightly in the lottery hunting mode, not because of their ability. I totally agree with what you're saying, but the Jaren Jackson injury scares me, and right.
he's such an important part of what they are.
Mm-hmm.
I think he is, to me, more important than Ja. I think he is such a great player that people don't talk enough about.
If he doesn't foul all the time, yes, right. I agree.
Just because what he does on both ends of the floor, I think he's such a special player, and I think
he's like the modern big. If you wanted to go in a lab and create one, like it would be in the mold of Jaren Jackson.
If the basketball gods were like, what? How do we make Draymond Green better? It's like make him this, make him more athletic,
make him more athletic, 6'11", long wingspan,
give him longer arms. Yeah, let's do that, and then give him some shooting touch. Oh man.
I remember he had a 29 point. I was watching a Bucks Grizzlies game this year, and he had 29 points in the third quarter against the Bucks. It was some wild shit, but I also love his 3-point shot because it's wonky as hell, but that shit goes in all the time.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what it looks like, man. It goes in.
Yeah, exactly. The Jaren Jackson injury concerns with Jaren Jackson do scare me. Also, he fouls a lot still. Yeah. Like, I don't think he's the defender yet that people think he can be. Not even close. Which is why I would push back a little. I think Morant is, for now, more important just because he's more available, and also I don't think Jaren Jackson.
I'm just saying in a vacuum where they're both healthy and they're both
yeah, absolutely.
Like in a vacuum where they're both healthy and like they're both actively playing. I think absolutely. To me, the loss of Jaren Jackson hurts them more than if you lost Morant.
Exactly. But the Grizzlies are draft Twitter's darling, and I think with the Grizzlies and their coaching staff, they know how to fit. They know what type of style to play with their young players, and I hope also Justice Winslow stays healthy and has.
He could be an interesting piece.
He could be an interesting piece. I love Justice Winslow. Also part of the lefty gang. The Thunder, I have them obviously.
Pokusevski.
My guy Pokusevski. Gonna lead the Thunder to a higher win total than Chris Paul did. No, I'm kidding. But Chris Paul, they're obviously not going to win 50 games like they did last year with Chris Paul, or be on a 50-win pace. But they still have Al Horford, who is, I ragged on Al Horford for his time in Philadelphia. He was bad, but I also think, obviously, the roster just really affected everybody, not just Joel Embiid, Ben Simmons, but Al Horford himself. They have George Hill, Trevor Ariza, so they have a nice mix of veterans coming back, even though, like, Chris Paul, Steven Adams, Schroeder, all those guys left. You bring in Frank Jackson from New Orleans, who I like quite a bit, even though he was a reserve guard. My guy Pokusevski, and then they still have. You could throw out a lineup of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, George Hill, Lou Dort, Baisley, or somebody like that at the 4. Even Trevor Ariza, and then you could put Horford at the 5.
You just played 5 out. And
you just play 5 out.
You say Shea Cook.
Exactly. And I just think the Thunder still have some lineups they could play that makes them competitive most nights if this new coach is as good as at pulling the best out of players like Billy Donovan was with that squad last year. Billy Donovan, excuse me. I think the
Great
Thunder
coach.
could be in range of a play-in game. So I have the Thunder there, even probably slightly ahead of the lottery hunting, because I do think they got younger and therefore less experienced. But
Sure.
they still have a chance with the play-in game. The play-in game kind of changes things a bit.
Yeah, totally agree with all of those assessments. The only team I had in here otherwise on top of that was the Pelicans. So I had the Pelicans right there with the Thunder.
So this is probably our last discrepancy in the list, because you probably have the Kings and the Timberwolves in lottery hunting.
Oh no, I have them in the favorites category. They're gonna beat the Lakers.
They're gonna beat the Lakers. They're on the other side of the chasm with the Lakers.
Yeah, no, they're on the East. I put them on the East.
So I've been thinking about it. I am kind of starting to become lukewarm on this Pelicans team, mainly because I started to think about the fit between Steven Adams and Zion Williamson, and then David Griffin today.
Love the fit.
David Griffin today said that Zion is probably going to play some 3-2, which scares the shit out of me. It's not that I am a Steven Adams fan. I think he's a good player. I just question the fit because, one, Zion doesn't shoot threes really. He's mainly an interior player. Steven Adams doesn't stretch the floor as much as Derek Favors, even though Derek Favors wasn't a floor stretcher. He was a better space player than Adams. Adams occupies mainly the areas Zion likes to occupy. And unless the Pelicans make a commitment to being the best offensive rebounding team in the NBA, I don't know how much value you can get out of an Adams and Zion front court. Also, I don't like the downgrade from Drew Holiday to Eric Bledsoe. I don't know how much Kira Lewis Jr. is going to play. Is Lonzo going to be able to sustain another good year? He's in a contract year, and you know how that affects players.
Right.
They did re-sign Brandon Ingram, but Brandon Ingram's a good player. I think he could be an all-star level player. Is he best guy on championship team type of guy?
But I think he's
second best guy.
Team guy.
He could, for sure. He could be like in a play-in game. Absolutely, that would be a factor. I just feel like I was in love with last year's roster. Like they had JJ Redick, they had Derek Favors, they had a good mix of vets that know how to play and have skills that fit with their young guys. And I just don't see that as much this year. Etuan Moore was also another guard off the bench that could get hot, shoot threes, and defend a little bit. I'm just not sure. And I'm not sure about, the coaching changes. I'm just not so sure I have the Pelicans in as a play-in team as firmly as you do. I think they're still kind of lottery hunting. And also, how many games is Zion going to play this year? That's my other main sticking point. That's the big question to me.
To me, though, the idea to me is that Brandon Ingram, Zion on their own is enough to get me into the playing games.
But is he going to play 20 minutes a game? Is he going to be load managed? That's what I'm wondering.
That's the big question. But to me, like the idea that, so I took like all these players' floors, right? So like, what is the floor for Steven Adams? He's still a great rebound, great defender, great interior defender, which is what they needed last year. That was a problem they had last year, where they had probably the best defensive backcourt in the league with Drew Holiday and Lonzo Ball, and then just an open door at the rim.
Yeah, right. Especially in the bubble, that was a huge problem.
So I felt so bad because Lonzo and Drew would work so hard to like get the ball out of the guard's hands, and you're like, yeah, that's great defense, and then all of a sudden just the open
layup, back cut.
And you're like, what happened, guys? And so I felt so bad, but Steven Adams kind of solves that problem. Obviously, you lose Drew, that's a huge hole, but I think Lonzo can go ahead and step in and kind of mitigate that. I think that he's still one of the top perimeter defenders in the league.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then I think I understand your concern with Zion and Steven Adams. I think the difference though is that Steven Adams has become very accustomed after playing with Westbrook for so long to a player that likes to drive to the basket and likes to get into certain areas on the floor, which I think in a lot of ways Westbrook and Zion kind of do play in similar areas of the floor in terms of where they like to be in the interior in the paint and driving to the basket. And
Zion probably posts up a lot more than Westbrook,
right?
But yeah,
but I think like just in terms of diving to the basket and where they want to be on the floor, I think Steven Adams does understand that spacing, and he's actually very good at spacing the floor in that way. I also think he's very underrated as an interior playmaker. I love him.
Agreed.
With the ball in the post and like able to hit cutters, which I think is perfect for a player like Zion and Brandon Ingram, who love to cut, and Lonzo too. Lonzo's an underrated cutter as well.
Oh yeah,
absolutely. So I love the way that offense functions. And again, like looking at floors, like what is the floor of JJ Redick? JJ Redick, even if he's bad, is still a solid defender and a top tier 3-point shooter. I think that as soon as you start to put all these pieces together, even if Zion isn't 100% healthy, I think that hurts them. But I think like having a player like Brandon Ingram that they can go to in the half court is still a solid option. I think letting him go on one-on-one is a solid option in any offense. But I still think on the fast break with Lonzo, with Kira Lewis Jr., with Eric Bledsoe, I think that's a dangerous front court or a dangerous backcourt in the open court. And I think like they can be a really fun team to watch. And again,
maybe I am underrating how many regular season games Bledsoe will win, because I'm out on Bledsoe. I would honestly just flip Bledsoe before the season start. I would have flipped Bledsoe a while ago after I got him in the trade and started Kira Lewis, but maybe I'm underrating that.
I think having a player like an alpha dog offensive player like Eric Bledsoe and that aggression that he plays with on the offensive end of the court can really help a player like Lonzo and Kira Lewis Jr. get into their groove. And like sort of say like, hey guys, come with me. Let's go to the basket, right? And like having, I don't think Lonzo's ever played with a guard like that, where their main thing is to score. And I think if a little bit of that can rub off on Lonzo, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, and they also, I also kind of had some questions about, did the game pass by Stan Van Gundy, because obviously he is still a really good basketball mind. It's just that he didn't have a really good showing in Detroit. Now, granted, part of it was also because he was also the president of basketball operations, so maybe not juggling two roles at once will have him more focused on the coaching and the schemes and all that stuff. So maybe that will help a little bit. I
love Stan as a coach too, so that's another thing.
So that comes to my second big picture question, actually. And we don't have to talk about the Kings or the Timberwolves unless you really want to talk about.
No, I'm good. They're just they're stinking it up over there trying to.
I do want to talk, I don't want to talk about the Kings, but I will say I love their off season. But there are.
Yeah, I think both teams had solid off seasons, but like not enough to even.
Yeah, they're lottery hunting. Let's just establish this now. Kings and Timberwolves are in the lottery hunting tier 6, which is tier F. Sorry, guys. Or tier F. But my big picture question, we can end the podcast on this. It's summer of 2024. So we're fast forwarding. This is another projection question. Summer of 2024.
Won their 4th straight championship.
Yeah, LeBron James won his 4th straight championship, but people will still argue 6-0 in the finals for Michael Jordan, even though LeBron will have 8 at this point. But which startup, I like to refer to these teams as startups because I do like young teams with assets.
Sure.
Which startup among the Grizzlies, Thunder, and Pelicans would you bet would have won a playoff series first?
Thunder?
Yeah. I'd go Grizzlies. So
I think the Grizzlies are better set up now, but I have way too much faith in Sam Presti as a GM.
Fair. Dude, the amount of first round picks, and as somebody who has watched Sam Hinkie and, have praised Sam Hinkie, the god himself, among process lore, what Sam Presti is doing is fucking nuts.
Yeah.
So the amount of draft picks.
The thing is, like, I trust Sam Presti too much as a GM with the amount of assets they have and with the next 3 to 4 drafts being stacked with talent.
Mm-hmm.
Like, stacked with talent.
Like, you have Cade Cunningham in the 2021 draft, and you got Chet Holmgren,
and then Amani Bates.
And then Amani Bates. Amani Bates is going to be 2023, right? He's a junior.
Right. Yeah. So he's going to be a year behind unless they change the rule.
Oh, yeah, unless he reclassifies.
Right. So, again, like, there's just so much. There's a lot of talent. And that's just the top picks. There's so much more talent. These are probably the next 3 to 4 years are probably the best drafts that we've seen in the last decade.
Yep.
So, potentially, just in terms of hype and how much we know about these players so far,
and their games,
potentially some of the best. Right. So, honestly, like, I just have more faith in Presti. Looking at the rosters right now as they're currently constructed, I think that in terms of just pure growth, I think the Grizzlies are better suited. I would argue the Pelicans too if Lonzo takes a step and if Zion stays healthy. But again, those are two big ifs.
I'm afraid that the Pelicans won't, re-sign Lonzo out of restricted free agency.
That's okay.
For some reason, he's just still.
We'll take him back. We'll take the boy home.
No, we'll take him. We could use a point guard that could shoot threes and play defense and play make. Like the Sixers could use a guy like that. But no, in all seriousness, like I still feel like he's being underrated a little bit.
So do I.
And I think people are looking at people.
We're both big Lonzo Ball fans, so this is
no surprise. This is no surprise.
People ask.
We say this with 100% of the bias. But no, I think people are going to use the bubble against Lonzo. If you're already a Lonzo hater or didn't like Lonzo in the draft, the bubble is going to be confirmation for you that he's always been a garbage player or whatever. I'm telling you, his unique skill set of passing, size, defense, and being able to knock down an open three is so unique. The Pelicans have to extend him. I think he is a good player, and you keep good players on your team. There are times where it might be time to let somebody go and flip somebody for value. Lonzo is such a unique player. I always take chances on high upside guys with unique skill sets that aren't necessarily, they're just one of a kind. And I think Lonzo has a one of a kind skill set if that 3-point shot continues to improve. And
plus his chemistry with Zion can't be understated either.
Oh yeah, his chemistry, dude. I mentioned it before, but I did a YouTube video on the chemistry of Lonzo and Zion. I even did like a really bad Photoshop of a stock chemistry lab photo and put Lonzo and Zion's face in it. So you could check the Sly Hooper YouTube channel if you want to laugh at that. But the Lonzo and Zion are just such a perfect combo that, along with Brandon Ingram, I think that's a pretty solid big three. I would just say the Grizzlies, I think they're better constructed, like you mentioned. So I think I'm just going with the certainty because remember, the Celtics had all these draft picks, right? And we talked about this before. I trust Sam Presti, by the way, 100%. I'm sure he'll make a lot of good decisions. He'll probably make some bad ones with all the draft picks he has, but you have to cash in on those assets. And I think the Grizzlies have a plethora of young players that have turned out. D'Anthony Melton, they didn't get through the draft, but they traded for him. They got him back. They brought him back on a really cheap 4-year, $35 million deal. They obviously get John Morant, Jaren Jackson Jr. They steal Brandon Clark. Like they traded for him, and apparently a bunch of other teams decided they don't need a small ball forward who could play defense and improve on his 3-point shot. You still have Justice Winslow. I like Dylan Brooks. I don't know if they're going to extend him this year. I don't know if he's going to be a part of, the team later on by 2024 like I projected, but with the talent the Grizzlies have, I just really think Dylan Brooks already agreed to an extension. I want to correct myself there, but I just think the Grizzlies have enough on the court right now to where even if the Thunder and the Pelicans do too, but I think the Grizzlies are better fitting and they're better set up, and I just see them winning a playoff series first because I'm also a big believer in John Morant. I think he is a special player. He needs to improve he improved his jumper. I'd like to see him improve it more, especially on the move. But he's already a sublime passer, a freak athlete, and just incredible handle. And with Jaren Jackson Jr. there, I just think the Grizzlies have their 1-5 combo that can actually fit together and run plays with each other. I think they have that for a long time, and I think that's ultimately the advantage that team has over the Thunder and the Pelicans.
Right. I do agree with you on Morant. I think that my big concern with him is defensively.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, if he takes huge steps there, I totally see that.
And he doesn't even need to be a good defender. I think he's a smart player.
He's serviceable.
He's a smart player, so I think he could be serviceable.
Right. He just can't be a revolving door, which he was most of last year.
Right.
And again, he's a rookie. So I'm not, I don't put too much on that, but I think like when you're talking about the next 4 years,
he definitely needs to get better for sure.
Yeah, he needs to get better.
Him and Jaren Jackson.
4 years is not. Like, we say 4 years like it's a long time. 4 years is not that long of a time.
No, it's not.
And so, like, when you're talking about in terms of pieces they have that I trust more, like, to me, you always went on defense. Like, I would take, not going on future projection, because obviously John Morant, future projection, like, you take him way higher. I would take SGA over Ja to win a game right now. Like, if I had to choose a player to, like, hey, you're playing a pickup game for your life, who are you taking? I would take SGA.
I agree with that.
So, as a piece to build around in the short term, over the next 4 years to win a playoff series, I think that, again, with Sam Presti, with SGA being a more complete player at this point, and again, also getting better, and also with all the draft pick and the assets, I would still take the Thunder.
For sure. I mean, there's no right or wrong answer. With all these tiers is subjective, even though I am 100% right in my rankings. No. But
I think the West is pretty straightforward. We'll get more into it next week when we talk about the East.
The East has more big picture questions. That's why we only did 2 for the West, because it is pretty straightforward. Like, the Lakers are the favorites. They're going to be the favorites heading into the season. As long as LeBron James is alive and breathing and on the Lakers roster, the Lakers are contenders. So
yeah, and all the playoff teams are pretty well established, and we know who they are, and the teams that are bad, or we know who they are, and there's very clear distinctions here. Where the East is just kind of a
the East cluster. Is gonna. I'm excited. I was excited for this podcast. I'm excited for the East podcast next week. And I will try to leave out as much Sixer bias as I can. No promises. Probably not gonna happen as often, but stay tuned for that episode next week. We are done previewing the West for this episode. Stay tuned for Box Out Banter next week. And until then, we'll talk about the East, and we'll see you then.
B.O.B.